So today we will talk about the upcoming mandates in the United Kingdom. I'm honored to introduce you to two speakers, Rachel Stirrat from HMRC and Misso, who is from VATCalc, also a UK-based software company focusing on tax determination and tax filing. And myself, I'm from Storecove and will tell you a bit about our solution. About the Demio tool, what you see here is to the right that you have handouts. So we will add the presentations of all three of us as a handout and send those to you. And you will receive the video. So that's all been taken care of. And you find a chat where you see that you can ask questions. And the three of us, and maybe also Nikki, will try and answer your questions. There's no speaking possibility, so everything should go via the chat. I would like to give the stage to Rachel. Rachel, you can see your own presentation, I presume?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Rachel Stirrat. I work at HMRC in the e-invoicing and digital reporting policy team, and I lead our external engagement on all things e-invoicing. So thank you so much for having me here today. Yes, I can control the slides. Excellent. So, as you may well be aware, at budget in 2025, the UK announced that we will be introducing an e-invoicing mandate for VAT invoices from April 2029. And we also committed to working closely with stakeholders to develop an implementation roadmap, which we will be publishing at budget this autumn. The work with stakeholders will, I very much expect, go far beyond just working up a roadmap. And alongside this announcement, we published a response paper to the consultation we did on increasing uptake of e-invoicing last year. And as well as summarising the responses to the consultation, the paper also sets out how we're going to take forward work on developing our e-invoicing mandate and the standards and the rest of the regime required to support the mandate. And as set out in that paper, we're planning to do quite a lot of working with stakeholders, whether that's kind of businesses, rep bodies, tax professionals and software providers, to make sure that we will be kind of developing a regime that achieves our objectives, which are dual focused. So I'm from HMRC. It's not going to be a surprise that we do care quite a lot about tax compliance, and we want the e-invoicing regime to facilitate kind of easier tax compliance to drive accuracy in tax returns. But the government also sees e-invoicing as a tool that will drive productivity by improving business efficiency. And so making sure that we end up with a regime that enables the development of easy to use solutions for businesses of all sizes, and the e-invoicing works across all sectors and all sizes of business is absolutely uppermost in our thoughts as we take this work forward. And HMRC will continue to be working very closely with the Department for Business and Trade as we develop this programme. I expect most people here know what e-invoicing is, but just in case someone hasn't done their homework, when we're talking about e-invoicing, we're talking about invoice documents that are issued, transmitted and received in structured formats, allowing for automatic electronic processing. And what we see e-invoicing as is a development, the next step in invoicing, as we've already seen people largely move from paper invoices to PDFs. We're not just talking about PDFs, we're talking about kind of structured data where the transmission into accounting systems is largely automated. The huge benefit here is really the minimizing the risk of errors, because data entry is somewhere that it's really easy to just make a mistake. I'm sure most of us have had that experience of the wrong number ending up on a spreadsheet. So we think that e-invoicing is something that is going to really bring benefits to the UK economy. I mentioned that this is a mandate covering VAT invoices. Invoices are, of course, both a commercial document and a fiscal document. So Invoices are part of how businesses work, and you're exchanging invoices for your own means and for your own reasons with, and probably would be doing so whether HMRC cared about them or not. But HMRC does care very much about VAT invoices. And what we are looking at here is the e-invoicing requirement applying to existing VAT invoices. And so just up on the screen, we have a note of the VAT invoice requirements in the UK. This project isn't really looking at changing those, it's just looking at moving towards requiring VAT invoices to be issued as electronic invoices. A little bit of background to this policy. As I'm sure many of you will know, an increasing number of jurisdictions are mandating e-invoicing, and this is leading to increased discussion of e-invoicing in international trade deals and international forums, including places like the OECD. The UK is keen to be able to participate in these conversations to ensure the development of interoperable systems that help to avoid creating new trade barriers as different countries adopt e-invoicing systems. This also means there's a lot of regimes we can learn from. We see e-invoicing as bringing economic benefits, increasing business efficiency, reducing processing costs. There's some evidence that increasing use of e-invoicing can reduce late payments, which is a particular concern for the Department for Business and Trade at the moment. And one of the reasons that the decision was made to pursue a mandatory approach is that we think that the greatest benefits from e-invoicing occur when you have a wide network of users. And the way to drive that will be to ensure that as many people as possible adopt e-invoicing. And our view is that that is what a mandate will enable. And of course, it wouldn't be an HMRC presentation if I didn't talk about tax compliance benefits. A significant proportion of the UK's tax gap, which is the gap, the kind of a statistical figure for the gap between the tax we should collect and the tax we actually do collect, is not due to kind of fraud or people deliberately avoiding the tax, but is actually due to error and mistakes. So anything we can do to help make it easier to get your tax right is good from our point of view. We believe e-invoicing will minimise the risk of errors by transmitting data in a structured format, and use of e-invoicing will also facilitate easier audit on the occasions where we do need to open audits. So the budget announcement has set a really clear direction of travel, but there isn't detail yet. One of the really exciting things about this policy, from my perspective, working as a policy professional, is that we've set our direction and can now work really openly with stakeholders as we develop the UK e-invoicing regime. If you are a policy nerd, you might have heard the term co-creation, but essentially this is a way of us creating policy by bringing stakeholders in to the discussions rather than us doing our work behind closed doors, maybe doing a consultation, saying thank you, closing the doors again, and repeating. So we're trying to learn from kind of how we've worked well with stakeholders in other projects and make sure that we get a really wide range of contributions. We've already done a formal consultation, so we'll be running a range of activities, including workshops, webinars. We've been able to commission some user research, and of course, we'll be working with experts. And at the end of this presentation, there'll be details of how you can drop us a line if any of that might be interesting to you, or you'd like to spend some time with us talking about invoicing. In terms of building a UK regime, we will be looking at legislation. We'll be developing strong standards for the UK. Obviously, we'll be thinking about security protocols. Considering how to address issues around digital exclusion will be one of the areas we have to look at in particular. And also, of course, considering the impact on HMRC's systems and processes. There will be a very long list of other areas that we will be looking at. And one of the things we're really pleased about being able to take this collaborative approach. Sorry, that sentence went wrong. One of the reasons we're really pleased we can take this collaborative approach is it means we can test our thinking as we go, and it makes it much less likely that we just miss something because we didn't think of it, because we get to have our stakeholders, taxpayers, businesses, experts kind of have a look and say, oh, you might want to think about that as well. And so this co-creation is a methodology where we try and combine the experiences of our customers, experts, and HMRC colleagues. You know, in an absolute ideal world where they'd give me as many staff and time and money as possible, we'd talk to everyone. Obviously, that's not the world I live in, but we want to do our best to make sure we've got a really wide range of views from different taxpayers, different experts, and as well as bringing our colleagues within the organisation into this. So hopefully that means we get the benefit of everyone's experiences and expertise. Finally, I've talked a lot about talking to people. So how do you get in touch if you'd like to be one of the people we talk to? We have a e-invoicing engagement at hmrc.gov.uk mailing address. This is just a shared inbox, which is mainly checked by me and my team. It's not disappearing into the depths. So please, if you are interested in participating in anything we're running, if you think that you know, participating in a webinar or a roundtable with us might be interesting, drop me a line, and we'll be able to add you to our lists and get in touch to let you know what's going on and see what type of things you'd be interested in. Obviously, we're interested in perspectives from experts, but also from people who might be saying, I need to know a bit more about this, but here are my worries, and here are the things we want to make sure you address. So please don't worry that we wouldn't be interested in what you have to say. So I think this is a really exciting agenda. We announced the mandate quite a long way out from implementation to allow ourselves this time to develop the policy and to get the standards, to get the legislation out, and give everyone a decent notice period before the mandate takes effect. So there will be a lot of work ongoing over the next couple of years, a lot of opportunities to get involved if you wish. And the next big milestone for your diaries is at the Budget 26, when we'll publish our implementation roadmap, hopefully helping businesses start thinking about how they get ready for that April 29 mandate. Thank you.
Really interesting, Rachel. Thank you so much. And to everyone, please, as long as Rachel is here, ask your questions in the chat, so she might be able to answer your questions. And one question I do have, Rachel, the presentation is really clear, but around infrastructure, is there a clear decision or advice on which infrastructure will be used to transport the invoices?
So the UK already has use of PEPAL built into our public procurement networks. The UK's PEPAL authority is currently NHS Supply Chain. We have some work to do to decide exactly how that moves into this new phase of UK e-invoicing. It seems highly unlikely that we would move away from using PEPAL where it's already up and running and working. But there are some jurisdictions which are allowing kind of multiple infrastructures so long as there's a level of interoperability, and there are some which are going much more all in on one. So those are the sorts of decisions which we're still exploring and will be keen to explore with stakeholders. So but I think PEPAL is quite embedded, so we'd have to have a very good reason for moving away from that, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, clear. Yeah, I think the same. And like there are countries that leave the choice to the participants or the companies themselves. Like for instance, New Zealand says the choice is to the companies whether to use PEPAL or DBNA or maybe other networks that will appear in the future. I see that my question was one of the questions in the chat also. Then someone is asking about reporting. Could you say few words on the expectations around reporting and the date for that?
Yes. So on e-reporting or digital reporting, whichever term you prefer to use, I think we've tended to use digital reporting in our policy papers. We're continuing to explore the case for digital reporting. The announcement at budget just refers to e-invoicing. It doesn't make any commitment that we would be bringing in e-reporting, but we're looking at it and considering it quite seriously. Obviously, e-reporting requires HMRC to do quite a lot of work to make sure that we can receive, process and use the data appropriately and effectively. So while we are confident that e-invoicing is a useful thing to do in and of itself, it could also form the foundation of a future digital reporting regime if that's the direction we choose to go down. So we're continuing to explore that while we work up the e-invoicing regime. So we could end up with a phased implementation, or we could decide that e-invoicing is what we want to do on its own. So that's still under discussion, but in the policy paper we published, we discussed the fact that digital reporting was still under consideration. So, you know, it's public that we're doing this work.
Clear. Yeah, thank you so much. In the chat, there's another question for you, which is a bit more complex, so I would like to leave that to you. I'm going to share another presentation now, which is the Storecove presentation. With Kit, I agreed on the order of presenting. So I will be first, which feels like I'm going in front in the line, but it might give you a bit more context about e-invoicing, and then about the cooperation that we have with VATCalc on determination and filing. Thank you so much, Rachel, for your clear presentation. And if you like to stay to answer more questions, please do. Yeah, thank you. So a bit about Storecove. So we are a service provider, one of the service providers on the VATCalc network, and also certified on the DBNA network, which is the network for North America. And at this moment, it's really interesting times, because you all know about the Belgian mandate have started 1st of January this year, France upcoming September this year, and UK announcing their mandate for 29. So we really experienced that a lot of companies are now learning or are feeling that they have to start with e-invoicing. And this is what the wave here represents. It's the wave of companies that really need to start doing something with e-invoicing. Our company has offices, as where you see here, headquarters is in the Netherlands. We spoke about two networks, so one being the VATCalc network, mainly at this moment for Europe and Asia, but also Nigeria is involved, and I think South Africa is in discussion. So VATCalc is growing, and what we see is really that the mandates drive adoption. And then there's the DBNA network. I think at this moment, over 40 service providers connected to that network already, and starting to register participants on that network also. Oracle being involved, Microsoft, Halliburton, so different organizations involved in that network and starting to drive adoption. Where it's important to say that service providers, and VATCalc has over 800 service providers, DBNA has, as I said, over 40 service providers, they form the bridge between the two networks. And so that means if you find a service provider that is certified on both networks, they can make sure that whenever you send an invoice, based on the identifier that is in that invoice, the service provider determines where to deliver it and what format to deliver it in. So if you would send an invoice to the UK and you add a UK identifier, the service provider will decide, okay, this is located in the UK, and then it will ask what format do you need and automatically generate that specific format for that company in the UK. So e-invoicing is totally seamless in the future. And also with tax authorities, the CTC reporting, that is also seamless, because as a company, you only register once with tax authority. The tax authority then knows which service provider is allowed to report in your name. But that means that in that whole process, you first send an invoice, it's checked against the country. Do you need to report to the tax authority? If so, the tax authority will read the invoice, give you a certificate, and then you're allowed to send it via an open exchange network. Here you see these two networks, we call them four-corner models. Another four-corner model, which is quite successful, is telecom. So the telecom companies also are providers on the four-corner model. So it's proven success, and the tax authority on these networks are called the fifth corner. The special thing about these open exchange networks is the dynamic lookup. So the fact that you can ask the network, I have this identifier. Is it known on the network? Then somewhere, some company in the world will answer, yes, it's with me. That will be the service provider. And it will tell you what format they need. And as most service providers support, if you can't deliver via the Open Exchange network, alternatively, of course, you can send via email. And that means that one more of your customers available on the network is one less via email. So there you see that going from the old email infrastructure towards the new Open Exchange infrastructures is a transition phase. And there's a lot to do. There's a lot to do mainly about mandates. So do you introduce mandates, infrastructure plus CTC at the same time? Or do you opt for, like the UK does or like Belgium does, first B2B infrastructure and later CTC reporting? An example of a country that did it the other way around is Malaysia. They started with the CTC, so the reporting to the tax authority, but sort of missed out on the possibility to drive the infrastructure, to drive the network. So in Malaysia now, many companies are properly connected to the tax authority, but actually they don't have an infrastructure for their invoices other than email. So what that brings is that they don't have global reach. So these companies in Malaysia are sort of missing out on the possibility to send over Open Exchange networks. Probably it will be pushed by MDEC, the PEPAL authority in Malaysia, but that's up to come. Organization Storecove, we're in the area of e-invoicing for 10 years. I think PEPAL started in 2012, so that's 12, 13 years ago. So there you see how young actually this industry still is. I am in the board of the DBNA network, so the North American network, and with a group of service providers and companies in the US trying to drive adoption of the other Open Exchange network called DBN Alliance. Then our technical committee is well involved with both PEPAL and DBNA. So they are learning a lot. Here you see the type of customers that our organization serves. So mainly it is financial systems. We work via integrators, but we also have a lot of international companies that we support via our API. And here you see, for instance, if I look at the US, examples like ERP systems, APCore, T-Palti, who is only on the receiving side, ChargeBee, which is a billing engine. So it's all sorts of directions. And that is what represents Open Exchange networks. So it's sending and receiving. And actually, it doesn't matter which direction you start off with. But in the end, all companies will be connected to Open Exchange networks in both directions. More about the organization, which is that we are ISO certified, 27001. This is relevant because most likely soon PEPAL will introduce this as mandatory for all service providers. So it is important to be ISO certified. You have other data security certificates in other countries like SOC 2, for instance. But as we experience, ISO covers enough for most companies to feel safe whenever they work with a service provider that is certified. And here it shows our servers are in Dublin with Amazon, but we, for instance, for French regulations, have to also offer hosting in France, and there it's called Segment Cloud. So Storecove also being a platform agréé in France, meaning that we're also allowed to report in the name of companies to the tax authority in France. User dashboards, this is something that, because we are really an API focused company, are not common, but this is something that, for instance, consultancy firms consider as important, because most of the time when they connect a large international company to an Open Exchange network, it is a sort of transition phase. And if that transition might take 9 months, then in the meantime, you need some sort of dashboard to see all your invoices and to be able to send and receive the invoices from in the meantime. So dashboards being important, and also archiving throughout Europe becoming more and more important. Some countries have compliance archiving per country, like France and Italy say, okay, you really need to archive within the country. and others leave it up to the more overarching European archiving, which is good enough. Here you see the full flow. The thing being here to the left is that you see that financial systems, ERP systems, connect to an API, and that API brings that you have access to open exchange networks. But based on the location of the sending entity, you always first check if your invoice needs to be reported. And if so, you get a certificate, and then you're allowed to send via an open exchange network. And the even stronger factor in this is that some countries say if a receiver doesn't have a certificate on the invoice they received, then they're not allowed to deduct the taxes. And so that makes it not only strong for the sender that needs to comply with the tax authority rules, but also the receiver can't deduct the taxes if it wasn't sent via the tax authority. So that really brings that, that model is sort of a closed loop. Here you see the same flow on the receiving side. Actually, only difference between these two flows, other than that the whole flow is turned around, is that you see archiving APIs. Archiving APIs mean that whenever you receive an invoice, and here it's transformed from the data that it's entered with, so could be any e-invoice format from Japan or from Germany, Expression for France, Factor X. We always generate the same JSON data so that the ERP system can always read the document. But it also means that you don't know what original you received, and tax authorities and governments want the original to be stored for compliance reasons. So for that reason, it's important that you're able to retrieve the original like it was sent to you and store that in your own ERP system. And I'll just go one slide back. Here, there's also that archiving API, but here when sending, archiving means that you're able to retrieve the document like it was sent to you. Sorry, that you received it in, sent to you. No, I'm turning things around. But the archiving APIs just make sure that because everything is two-way communication, that you're always able to store the API and the invoice in your own system. And that brings that your ERP system has all the data. That's the important element there. Behind the API, we support many countries. Most of them are PEPAL countries, like you see, but some countries have special networks, like Finland, called Finvoice, a separate network. Switzerland has which is called QR bill, sort of banking payment link. And so all sorts of countries have different setups, but this fragmentation brings that service providers have this really added value because they make sure for companies that they can send and receive invoices over all these countries. This is an overview of CTC countries. CTC stands for Continuous Transaction Control, meaning that really on an invoice basis, you report to the tax authority. And so these mandates are what we experience, mostly what are pushing companies to start with e-invoicing because they have to. So they, like in Belgium, they have to be connected to the Open Exchange Network PEPAL. And in other countries like Italy, you have to send to the tax authority and they will send the invoice for you. So both mandates are strong, but we experience that the tax authority mandates in the end are the strongest because that's the 100% mandate from day one. As a company, we focus on two types of customers. On the one hand, financial systems that connect to our API and are then able to have all their users, like for instance, the users from Xero, from within their software, start with e-invoicing. They can register on PEPAL and DBNA, but they can also start sending and receiving, and they can start reporting. And so that's one connection to a full financial system. And to the right, these are all types of ERP systems by which we work together with the integrators that work for these ERP systems. And these integrators have a large group of trusted customers, of course, who like to use our technology to serve those customers and help them connect to PEPAL and the DBNA network. Special features, I think this is more towards the future. So now these networks mainly focus on e-invoices. But there are many other document types, e-document types, which can also be transported over these networks, like orders. Well, you see, archiving is really important. There is a format, what we call pre-agreed on the PEPL network that's called enhanced B2B. That means that you sort of envelope a document and only send an envelope pre-agreed between sender and receiver. So there actually you use the infrastructure of the open exchange networks for point-to-point sending, but which might offer a lot of possibilities for companies that don't want to change their document, that just say, we already have a document, we already agreed with our counterpart, let me just send and deliver that document. And so this is what both networks, PEPL and DBNA, are also getting ready for. And to the right, you see one of the important things of open exchange networks, other than that auto discovery that you saw in the beginning, invoice response. So up till now, invoice responses are like an invoice is delivered, properly received, or it is rejected, and those are responses that you receive whenever you send an invoice. But these responses, these notifications, can go deeper. If the connection between the receiving service provider and the end customer and the end ERP is properly set up, then you can receive messages like this, authorized, set for payment, paid. So this is really interesting managerial information, and more service providers support invoice responses, meaning that the senders receive these responses. And some countries even make it mandatory, like in Singapore, invoice response is mandatory. And what we experience, other than what you see here, is also that self-billing is upcoming. And so the self-billing document, another document type on the networks, but more and more companies now ask for self-billing to be introduced. This is just to show you, I won't go into technical details, but just to show you how actually the ERP system and Storecove is connected via an API. So mostly when a company comes to us and asks, hey, we want to start with e-invoicing, what we ask them is, do you have your own in-house developer that can connect the APIs and that is experienced with APIs? And if it's a financial system, that is mostly the case, that they have an in-house developer. And other than that, we ask them, do you have your own integrator that's experienced with your ERP that can connect to our RESTful JSON API? So here you see what the API offers, connectivity to PEPL DBNA, but also many CTC countries. And at this moment, we as a company are working on connecting Mexico, the Emirates, and Nemhandel, which is for Denmark, and finalizing France for being platform agréé. Last slide, and then I'll gladly leave it all to you, Kit. So this is actually to summarize what the API connection brings. So it brings two networks, PEPL DBNA. It brings hybrid formats, like in Germany, Zugpferd and Factor X in France, meaning a format that is sent and received via email still, but which is still an alternative that you have to support in countries where the hybrid document is popular. And what I want to emphasize is that by connecting to an API that automatically generates the formats for the different countries, you can also generate the subset of data that is needed per tax authority. And that is what VIDA is all about, in fact, in the digital age. Countries that report, made reporting mandatory, also have, of course, intra-communitary traffic. And that is where Europe says, okay, we want the data from the tax authorities reported to a central hub called VIS. The end date now, I think, is 2030, but dates are shifting. So it's important to be ready to be compliant for VIDA now for tax authorities that want reporting, but also upcoming tax authorities still. The cooperation that we have with VATCalc is because there's a logical combination for larger companies that need tax filing and tax determination. And what we did together with VATCalc is we made sure that within the same API, both services can be offered. And if you think about it, e-invoices are sort of the carrier of the data that consultancy firms or that is needed for tax filing and the tax determination. And that's why it's so logical that the companies work together. Kit, I would like to leave the floor to you. I open your presentation. Thank you all. And if you have questions, please ask them to me in the chat. Kit, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Dolf. Hi, everyone. I'm Kit Misso. I am the CEO of VATCalc, and as Dolf said, a partner of Storecove's, and we've been working together for many years. So what I'd like to do for the next 10 minutes or so is just give a little bit of a VAT view and our VAT view on e-invoicing and the digitization of tax. Oops, that did not work. Let me do it again. I pressed the wrong one. Let's try that. Okay, so I was delighted to hear the words that Rachel was using at the beginning quite frequently. She used the word VAT invoice, VAT e-invoice, and I heard her say that about 6 or 7 times. When we normally have conversations about e-invoicing, you don't ever hear VAT at the beginning of it, or very rarely, but it's really important. And I wanted to just highlight why it's important to think about VAT when you think about e-invoicing. And the main reason is because invoices are the taxable document. They are the proof of transaction. And there's a couple of points here around the UK VAT Act that talk about what's important there. They're the primary evidence that a taxable supply has taken place. You can't reclaim, you can't deduct your input VAT unless you've got a valid VAT invoice. Are they used for audit trail, and HMRC would potentially audit you and ask for proof of the invoices, particularly on deductibility. So it's really important. How do I proceed? I found it. Okay, so we already have a sort of form of digital VAT in Europe, and it's not really digital reporting, but we do have MTD, and MTD is a summarized digital reporting, and this is just an extract from the VAT notice that talks about it here. So the UK does require digital records to be kept for VAT purposes. So it used to be that you could kind of have a filing cabinet with a bunch of paper in that, and maybe that's compliant unless you get audited and you can't produce it. And now they do require digital records for VAT. That was part of that particular piece of legislation that was passed. There's also an API submission requirement for actually submitting your VAT return now, which is part of the Making Tax Digital initiative, and you have to use recognised VAT submission software to actually declare your UK VAT return, which is unusual. There aren't that many countries in Europe that have something like that, at least none that mandate it apart from the UK. And then the last one I think is really interesting as well, and I'm going to come back to this point a bit later on. This is to do with digital links. What they don't really want people doing is copying and pasting data from one place to another. It kind of disappears into the ether between the connections in systems. So, oh, it's okay, I've got a number and I've copied it from a spreadsheet and I've put it into this other spreadsheet. You know, really there's no solid audit trail. And we have this notion of a digital journey. So there's quite a lot of work being done to make things a little bit more compliant already. So why do we need e-invoicing too? And Rachel's touched on this, not to duplicate what she went on, but I'm just going to identify the one that I think this is really about. So the middle one is about strengthening tax compliance and closing the tax gap, and she's kindly shared some statistics on there. What's interesting for me is that despite the fact that we've had Making Tax Digital, that's actually gone up. It hasn't gone down. The estimates are it went from 9.5 in 23 to 24 to an estimated 11.4. I'm sure that all of that's mistakes, as she's pointed out. I'm not sure why they're always not in HMRC's favour, but we'll leave that for another day. So that's the reason why we're expecting to see additional compliance requirements here. So Dolf has just talked us through, you know, how do we send the documents? And I think many organizations are seeing this as a billing problem, an accounts payable and accounts receivable problem. I really just need to receive and send my electronic invoices, don't I? Okay, well, so I just need to find a provider, maybe get an implementer to do some integration work, connect my transaction system or systems, and then, you know, I've got an integration, I've got my provider receives my invoices, they end up back in my AP, you know, that they issue my sales invoices and they send them via that partner and they connect to these wonderful networks and it's great. That's great, brilliant. I'm off to the pub. Accounts payable, accounts receivable team, the billing teams, they're happy, everything's good. However, there are other problems. We are talking about a VAT e-invoice here. So the first one, and actually the question was asked already about this, I saw in the chat, was the VAT right on my sales invoice? I've got an ERP system or an accounting system. Did it calculate it correctly? And that might be quite simple in some cases. And someone mentioned rates and so on, but sometimes it's much more complicated. That there's lots of types of VAT that can be applied. If so, like the next one is really around, will my invoice be rejected? And that's, there could be many reasons for that. They could be structural, the invoice is incorrectly formed. They could be to do with the fact that your counterparty rejects them because they haven't got enough data. There's all sorts of reasons. So that's a business problem and also a tax problem to solve. The next one's interesting. We had a debate about VATCalc being one of the possible infrastructure. VATCalc has its own form of tax coding. Companies have typically their own tax codes, their VAT codes in their system that identify the rate, the type of supply from a VAT perspective, deductibility, all sorts of things in there. That's used for reporting and for posting to ledgers. But VATCalc's got their own. So how do we know that we're adding the right one? Around the outbound invoices, if you get it wrong, am I going to get paid? Will I get paid in time? This is an interesting one. We're becoming more transparent. Have I just... I didn't think about my business and whether I've got problems with my VAT determination or any of those things. Is it now more visible? We don't have obviously digital reporting yet, but in time, will it be more visible that I've got loads of mistakes I haven't got around to sorting out? This one is really critical here around the supplier. Will the supplier know? How do I know if the supplier has got the VAT correct? That's often an issue in accounts payable, where you typically got really people who aren't tax experts looking at invoices, trying to code them properly, trying to get the deductibility right, making sure that you can reclaim the right VAT, trying to report them correctly. And one of the interesting things about most of the mandates is they set a much more aggressive time frame for being able to reject invoices. So I think VEDA's at 10 days, and there are some mandates that are 5 now. And you may have had months before to look at your invoices in your AP process and work out that actually someone's applied the wrong VAT and then not pay them and ask them to credit and reissue that invoice. So there's a lot of considerations for that. And then, of course, these all relate on the right-hand side relate to that issue in accounts payable and purchasing. But the bottom one there, I think, is also really interesting too. So, particularly in the context of a country that has a digital reporting, albeit summary level, how are we going to make sure that our VAT return actually matches up to the invoices that we're issuing? Often they're completely disconnected processes right now. One is a billing process, one is an accounting process that has some other external approach to actually preparing the returns. So to go back to Rachel's term, VAT e-invoicing, on the top left-hand side, I think it really needs to look more like this. It's not just sending those documents like we saw in that simplified example. First of all, on the sales side, which is the top bit of this, we have all of these different channels that we get. Modern businesses are complicated. They sell directly through their ERP, on e-com sites, on marketplaces, through different types of trading systems as well. And some of those are really good at VAT, and some of them aren't very good at VAT. So some may have invoices that have well-prepared VAT. Others might need additional help with those. Even if the VAT's well-prepared, it's probably a good idea to validate it before you send it, because you're immediately issuing that invoice. Likewise, if you need help, then you might want to have an external system do the determination. And in any case, in many times, you also need to make sure that you've understood the correct VAT elements to go on that invoice. So often you might need a compliant invoice message. You might need to add these VATCalc tax codes we're talking about. We might need to make sure that we've got the right VAT registrations, as well as any correct calculations that you see on here. And only at that point, when you've covered these green things, have you kind of validated that the invoice is something you ought to be sending. It's a solid VAT invoice you feel confident about, and then you might invoice it. On the bottom side of this, what you're going to see here is, so I can't see that thing. receiving the invoice, the first thing you're really going to want to do is make sure that the invoice was correct, and that might be that the right amount was charged by your vendor and they're billing you for the right amount. But also you really want to check that the VAT was correct as well, because that can really impact your deductibility. The rate in the UK is 20%. If you can't deduct that, that can have very significant cash flow benefits issues for any organisation. And then the bit that most people forget in AP is also the tax coding that you use internally in your own systems, so that you can correctly report that transaction, but also post it as well. And that's going to be different to the PEPAL codes. People have their own internal codes. SAP has a 2-character code. Oracle's got longer ones. Many systems have got custom codes that you just add yourself. No one has a standard set of VAT codes, and so you need to add those yourself. And those green areas in particular are areas that businesses are going to catch businesses out unless they start thinking about them soon. Only at those points have you got invoices that you really want to post, but those are also the ones that have to correspond with your digital returns in the future and with your MTD VAT summary amounts right now as well. So this idea of kind of combining what the actual valid invoices are for the production of the return is an important one. And another question that was asked in the chat earlier was, does it include B2C? And it doesn't include B2C, no. It also doesn't include cross-border transactions as well, all of which do belong in a VAT return. So there's this problem of making sure that you understand that you're reconciling all of the invoices that you've sent, but also there's additional ones that need to come into your returns as well. So it's a non-trivial problem. So, right now, the 2029 is a 4-corner. We've discussed, HMRC are not automatically going to get the invoices. There's no real-time reporting, no pre-filled returns. But I think it's really fair to suggest that this is just the start of the process. I think it's reasonable to suggest that we will be fully digitizing VAT in the UK. So I think one of the things that I would suggest is to consider tax technology as well as electronic invoicing, and then make it kind of VAT electronic invoicing. And if nothing else, just include your tax team so that they can provide their points of view. It shouldn't be just a billing problem. It shouldn't just be an ERP, AR, AP problem. You should have tax included. And we lost... we saw in the first one, we had Mr. Bean, where he was kind of just simplifying it, and then we had Blackadder in the second. So I'll leave you with a very traditional quote from a Brit: "Have a plan so cunning you could put a tail on it and call it a weasel."
That's great, Kit. Thank you so much, and really clear. I think it's a really interesting extra to understand how this playing field works, especially for the UK. Really clear presentation. Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you so much. There were, at least I can't see any new questions, so I think we can leave it to this. The good thing is that most people stayed. I think only 3 or 4 dropped off, so we had an interesting meeting today. Thank you, everyone. You will all receive the handouts and the videos per email. And I want to thank the presenters and see you soon on whichever conference or webinar on e-invoicing and tax. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.